Hey there, everyone, and thanks for tuning in today for today's one-on-one interview with Dr. David Roberts, the Dean for External Education at Harvard Medical School. The COVID-19 pandemic, it has dramatically changed the medical community across the United States. Students and institutions have had to rapidly adapt to continuously changing guidelines and circumstances. These changes have left students and institutions to adjust without much precedent or guidance of how to best do so. Today's interview is for current and aspiring medical students to learn more about the status quo of medical education, how COVID has impacted it, and future directions. It is for leaders in the medical education community to hear ideas that may help guide them in the challenges they are facing. We hope you and your peers will watch to help bring these important conversations to the national stage. Unlike our previous live streams, this one-on-one is not being broadcasted live. Nonetheless, I encourage you to share your thoughts and questions in the comments section below. So now to introduce our guest today, I'm speaking with Dr. David Roberts. He is an alumnus of Harvard Medical School. He completed an internal medicine residency at Massachusetts General Hospital, followed by a fellowship in pulmonary critical care. He worked as a pulmonologist and educator at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and has served in several medical education leadership roles at the Carl J. Shapiro Institute for Education and Research. In 2014, he became the inaugural Dean for External Education at Harvard Medical School. Thank you, Dr. Roberts, for coming on. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Noah, and hello to everyone. I'm excited to be a part of this fascinating discussion.
Great. How was the bio? Did I get it right?
You did. I've had a number of different roles in medical education, thinking about how do we teach? How do we teach teachers to teach? How do we think about new programs for medical students and all learners across the spectrum of medical education?
Well, what I want to do to start off is I want to kind of dive into more about what your title means exactly. So I want you to tell me a little bit, what is a Dean of External Education? What are some of the roles and responsibilities that title has?
Absolutely. There aren't a lot of deans for external education, and I'm the first one at Harvard Medical School. We have three education deans at Harvard Medical School. There's a dean of medical education whose responsibility, and that's Dr. Ed Hundert. His responsibility and that of his team is for medical students on campus and students who are involved in combined degree programs like MD, PhD programs and MD, MBA programs and many others. We have a dean for graduate education, Dr. Roz Siegel, and her team is responsible for all of our 8 master's degree programs and our PhD programs. And my team, the external education team, handles all other kinds of medical education that Harvard Medical School runs. So that includes online learning, which may be particularly relevant to a number of our listeners. So we have an amazing online learning platform called HMX, and that you can find at onlinelearning.hms.harvard.edu. And those are courses that are fully asynchronous. They're amazing, high-resolution content, no lectures, no video, no PowerPoints, and that is content in fundamental subjects like physiology, biochemistry, genetics, immunology, and pharmacology. And then we have an advanced series of courses that way as well. Then external education also runs programs for physicians in practice, both in the US and around the world, and that's called postgraduate medical education. So those are programs like accredited continuing medical education for both doctors, nurses, social workers, and others. And we have what we call global certificate programs, where we teach doctors how to do things that might help their academic careers. So become better leaders, become better clinical researchers, become experts in safety and quality and informatics. And we run those programs now around the world, now with COVID, all done live virtually just like this, with some very special interactions to make them worthwhile. We also have a big lay learning program. So our Harvard Health Publishing, which is found at health.harvard.edu. and our executive education programs, where we're teaching non-physicians about health and healthcare. And we have many other programs, but those are the main ones that I run.
I was going to say that is a tremendously broad amount of programs that you are heading up. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it definitely keeps me busy, and the challenges that we faced in medical education, moving from a residential, primarily residentially delivered set of programs, we have also shifted and we've transformed all of our programs to live virtual interactions, at least through the rest of this calendar year. And there are some things that are very similar to medical education for medical students, and there's some things that are remarkably different.
Right. So a question I have about that is, you mentioned that you are the inaugural dean for this role. In 2014, I don't know if anyone would have foreseen a global pandemic that was going to limit sort of in-person lectures and other educational activities. So when this role was created, I'm curious, what was the catalyst behind that? What was the inspiration?
Yeah, it's a great question. I will say that the catalyst was not fears of a pandemic or really good contingency planning or something like that, but rather that we saw there was an incredible opportunity to expand the reach of Harvard Medical School and its incredible faculty for learners around the world. So we reach an extraordinary audience now. So some of these numbers that I'm going to tell you are almost hard to believe, but they're true. So on the health publishing side, we have about 20 million people come to our website each month, and we have 2.5 million people following us on Twitter. I mean, those are huge, huge numbers. We have tens of thousands of people who come, doctors who come for continuing education program. We have now tens of thousands of people who do our online learning programs. And that's really what our hope was, that we could expand our impact around the world. Now, it turns out that this is the moment for distance learning and for leveraging the principles about what we know about what works in learning in this format. So we designed all of our online and virtual experiences with how do we maximize engagement? How do we maximize the learning for our students, so that this is not lectures, this is not PowerPoint, this is really the concepts that we know work, interleaving and spaced repetition, and really trying to understand, like, what could we do with online learning as a tool that would really enhance the experience of learners around the world.
Mm-hmm. Wow, those numbers were really astonishing. 20 million people a month. My gosh. Well, the next question I want to turn to is, have you discussed some of the strengths and weaknesses that you saw in medical education before the COVID-19 pandemic sort of took the world by storm? That's kind of a broad question, but just if anything comes to mind.
Yeah. So my colleague, Dr. Ed Hundert, runs our medical education, but I've spent a good portion of my career thinking about this, and I'm happy to comment on it as a now somewhat tangentially related education dean. Here's my take on this: is that we and every other medical school has been going through curriculum reimagining, reform, redesign over the last decade. And medical school, in many ways today, the learning, or I should have said, as of January 1st, had really evolved quite a bit from the time that I was a medical student to going back 100 years. And yet, some aspects of it really hadn't changed much at all in 100 years. If you think about the time of the Flexner Report, which is about 1910, to now, 110 years, I'm not so sure that clinical rotations look dramatically different. They may be at different places. They may have different approaches. Students may have different challenges in terms of patients moving in and out of inpatient settings much more quickly. We have longitudinal integrated clerkships that are more based in the ambulatory setting. There are lots of differences than there were 100 years ago. But the fundamental apprenticeship immersion model that we do in blocks really hasn't changed dramatically much. Now, the didactic portion of the curriculum has evolved quite a bit, and you may know Harvard uses a system that's called CBCL, case-based collaborative learning, and it's really quite innovative. And I think the idea is that people learn to work by themselves. They work in pairs, they work in quartets, they work as a large team of 10 groups of 4 within a room. And so one of the strengths of that curriculum is that we had moved away from a fact-based curriculum to a thinking-based curriculum. And the idea is that you are learning to be a lifelong learner. Now, it just so happens that some formats transition far better to distance-based learning than others. And the case-based collaborative learning format that we're using has actually done remarkably well. And it's been amazing to see that my colleagues like Dr. Barbara Cockrell, who was literally teaching her course and then had 24 hours to transition that to online. Wow. And she and her colleagues really did an amazing job to make that possible. And now we're thinking, since we were, I don't know if we were the first, we were very early in saying we are going to move to completely remote learning for the first year students. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about the difference for more senior students, but come this fall, all of our students will learn remotely. And so now there are a whole new set of challenges, because we can't simply just teach everybody take the content and put it on Zoom. That's not going to work. We've got to plan that, and that's what our colleagues my colleagues are doing right now.
Right, and that actually transitions really nicely to the next question I had, which relates to a piece that you co-authored in 2017. It was titled "Saying Goodbye to Lectures in Medical School: A Paradigm Shift or a Passing Fad." It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. And it advocated for a more interactive and more engaging teaching style, sort of like what you had referenced. So my question is do you feel that distance-based learning and online learning can facilitate those goals well, or do you see challenges in doing so?
Yeah. So again, I wish I could say that my colleague, Dr. Rich Schwartzstein, and I were so prescient that we, 4 years ago, imagined this pandemic. But again, our argument really revolved around this idea that what is the most precious resource within medical education today? And it's really faculty-student interaction time. And so we made an argument that rather than have a bunch of faculty members stand in the front of a room and, speak volumes of content, which then go straight into notes, and then students go home and apply that through problem sets, turns out that that's really not a very good way to learn, and it's not a good use of time. So instead, we've talked about, and that article emphasized the concepts of, and I think they're now pretty commonplace, this idea of flipping the classroom, the idea that everyone comes to the classroom prepared to interact, to engage with each other, to answer a question themselves, and then to debate with their colleagues. Do I have the right answer? Do you have the right answer? Let's come to a consensus. Let's agree on what we can disagree about so that we can all go learn more together. And that's really what the case-based collaborative learning methodology was really designed for. And that's where the HMX online learning platform was really designed. So this could be used as a tool, and it's now used at about 25 or 30 medical schools around the world, because it really helps stimulate learning in a way that most modern medical students really enjoy. It's engaging, it's interactive, it's highly assessed. There are hundreds of assessment questions. So I think one of the questions as we think about what virtual can do, and you and I are here and we're pretty static, and I can move around and do jazz hands and try to keep it exciting or whatever. But we know that this is still pretty static, right? And you can be dynamic and I can be dynamic, but that's not enough. And so we have to ask the question of, like, if we were going to design interactive learning in this format, how would we do that? And so you might want to link to a very interesting Boston Globe editorial by a colleague of mine, Bharat Anand, A-N-A-N-D, who is the Vice Provost for Advances in Learning at Harvard University. And he's asked the interesting question, like, what could we do better with virtual or remote learning that we couldn't do in person? That's a very interesting question. And so we're just starting to think about that and try to identify what those silver linings of this challenging situation are.
Right. And you'll have to share that piece that you just recommended with me, and I'll post it in the comments section. And I encourage everyone to actually take a read of that NEJM piece. The picture that was posted actually looked very similar to some of the class formats of my first 2 years of preclinical learning. So we've come a long way. So my next question for you comes from an article that was recently published in the Harvard Crimson, the university student-led newspaper. It contained the announcement that you and several other of the deans made about moving classes for the incoming first-year medical students to an online format. So I was curious what kind of brought you to that decision, and why specifically just first-year students versus second, third, and fourth?
Yeah. So this is a challenging situation, right? We are dealing with a moving target. Today is July 2nd that you and I are talking, and the US is having more cases of COVID-19 diagnosed each day than we've ever seen so far since the beginning of this pandemic. Fortunately, right now, at least, the deaths that were so high before in the Northeast, we are not seeing in the Sunbelt states, and deaths tend to lag behind cases in this illness. And so we'll see what comes as hospitalizations are quite high. Right. That tempo, and with input from lots of smart people across the medical school and across the university and Harvard Chan School of Public Health and many others, said to us, what we know is that this disorder is likely to be with us for a while. We know that it spread through close contact, particularly indoors. And we know that one of our goals is to de-densify our campus as much as possible. Right. And we have to be able to handle the scenario that could happen if a student gets sick, and how do we prevent that from snowballing into a large cluster outbreak. And so my colleagues here have spent an extraordinary amount of time and effort thinking about how do we reopen our campus, which was closed for nearly 3 months, and do that in a very safe and thoughtful way. So we have just had students return to campus, some after being quarantined for 2 weeks, and we had space to house a relatively small number of students here on campus. And so those are going to be more senior students. Our first year students are all going to learn remotely, and we are going to do some amazing things to teach them all the content that they need to know to be prepared for when they return. And that's what's happening now with our second year students. So our second year students go right into their clinical year. And so we are catching those students up with an intensive, very carefully done program where they are learning in small groups with social distancing and with mask wearing and all sorts of other precautions. But the reality is that it's July. It's not even cold and flu season. And Massachusetts has worked very, very hard, and I congratulate the governor and all of the folks in public health who have really worked hard to keep us all safe from this.
Right. And I totally agree in the fact that we're only in July. It's constantly changing the situation. So it's good that you're erring on the side of keeping students safe, which is the priority. It kind of brings me to my next question, which is that it seems that the preclinical years already have a lot of the infrastructure to adapt to online learning, at least in my personal experience. So I'm curious if you see the clinical years with rotations and electives and other in-hospital activities also moving towards a distance-based or an online format.
So the simple answer is that immersions, I think, are going to require immersion in some safe way. And, our hospitals, and we have some amazing hospitals, our affiliated hospitals are open. They are, people are working incredibly hard. And initially, we thought it was in the best interest of the safety of our students that they not participate in COVID care during the midst of our surge and the crisis time. We need to train them, though, and so we need to figure out a way to do that safely and have them interact with faculty safely and have faculty be safe. Everybody's got to stay safe. So one of the things that we are doing is really reimagining that. And we've had some very creative solutions. I'll mention two. So one is that there are some clinical areas which are really ripe for distance learning. And so my radiology colleagues created an amazing radiology month clerkship that kind of zoomed students into the reading room, and they had unknown cases and they did some amazing teaching, all done virtually. And, you could make an argument sitting in a dark room in person versus sitting in your home. Maybe it's, I would never say it's not going to be easy, and you're going to lose something in person-to-person interactions. And, hey, can I ask you a question? There are limitations to our technology platforms for sure. But to a reasonable proximity, I think people learned a lot of great radiology, and I really congratulate the innovative thinking of the faculty who came up with this approach in time of crisis. Similarly, we've said, you know what, telehealth, which has moved from, let's say, less than 10% of outpatient visits to more than 85% of visits, we've got to teach our students how to do this. So let's have a telehealth rotation. And so we're in the midst of developing that, and that content, I think, will serve them for many years to come. On the other hand, how do you teach surgery? I don't know. I think you can have a GoPro on your head. You can have a microphone in your ear. You can do all sorts of things. One of our executive education programs taught aspects of surgery to business people, where we had a faculty member in the operating room with a camera, with a microphone, and we had another surgical faculty in the room with the learners, translating and pointing out what they were seeing on the screen. And it was faculty intensive, but it was an amazing experience for the people who were looking to learn. Now, they weren't looking to learn anatomy or surgical technique. So I think there are challenges to each of these things that we're trying to do.
Right. And that actually brings me to the next. You are transitioning these questions fantastically, because the next question I had is, innovators, they're always trying to find ways to improve the status quo. In medical education, some things that immediately come to mind are virtual reality for anatomy labs, or those robotic simulation patients to mimic clinical or patient encounters. So are there any technologies or innovations on the horizon that you've heard about, or even just imagining, that you're excited about to maybe better education or transform it?
Yeah. Well, think about this thought experiment. If I had said to medical educators a year ago I want you to reimagine your entire curriculum and put it all remote online tomorrow or next week. You know what they would have said to me?
What?
They would have said, we need to form a committee and we're going to take a couple of years and we're going to plan that out. And it's not possible.
Right.
And here's the reality is that when, a big wind blows, some build walls and some build windmills. And a huge wind called COVID-19 blew, and we had no choice. And we built windmills. And we didn't say we're not going to teach our students. We're not going to think about how do we prepare students for the coming crisis, surge and all these sorts of things. We said, let's figure out a way to do it. Necessity in that case was the mother of innovation and experimentation, and not everything worked, and it was hard. But the reality is that I think this is the moment for telemedicine, for teleeducation, for technology. And I don't know what incredible things are going to come. And I think virtual reality and robotic simulation, those are great ideas. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that either of them is yet today ready for prime time, but there is huge motivation to make this happen really quickly. And so, we've gotten the attention of a lot of people who said, let's make it happen. And I think there are some amazing companies and innovators really driving this forward. And now we're really motivated to make it happen. Now, what if the pandemic went away tomorrow? What if it, just poof, disappeared?
Right.
I would hope that some of the amazing changes actually stay. And we think about how can we do things better in the future? Telehealth, which has been resisted for a long time in a lot of ways with regulations and all sorts of things, it really can help a lot of people. And so I hope some of these things become permanent. Same thing within education. I don't think we should just imagine, even if everything got better, which I don't think is going to happen, that we should just go back to the way it was.
Right. And I will say the telemedicine and telehealth, we integrated it into our curriculum a little bit at Wake Forest early on, I guess back in May. And it is amazing, these changes that are coming through and the improvements they're going to have, not just for patient care, but also for students in education going forward. So we're already towards the conclusion at this point. So I really appreciate your time so far. My last final question is if I'm an incoming medical student, if I'm an applicant, what advice, what tips, what takeaways do you have from our conversation today, sort of about what can I expect going forward in medical education?
Yeah. Well, I guess my two pieces of advice would be to learn the fundamentals incredibly well and learn and adopt a kind of learning stance rather than what's called a performance stance. Many of us who go to medical school are really good at getting high scores on tests, right, and performing, right? And we're less good at saying, I don't know, but boy, I'd love to learn that. And, it's no surprise that that's the case. But I think medical school and medical practice and, the future of what's to come is all about uncertainty and unknown and new things that you don't learn in med school. My colleagues who graduated from medical school in 1978, did they learn about HIV and AIDS? No. But if they learned about T cells, that really helped them understand this problem and solve those problems, right? So I don't think that most of us spent a lot of time before this year thinking about coronaviruses. Mm-hmm. But hopefully we all learned some immunology and virology, and we can adapt and we can learn how to learn all these things as we go through our career. And it takes about a shocking amount of time from a fact being known, like let's say that beta blockers help you after you have a heart attack. Well, from the time that fact was known to the time when most patients actually receive that care equitably across all races and socioeconomic status and everything else, that's somewhere between 30 years and never, right? So it takes an entire generation or two for big things to happen. And so I would encourage people, learn the basics, learn how to learn, ask the really hard questions about how could we do this better? How could we do this in a fair way? Are we seeing representation of people who look like the country and the world in the way that we think they should? I would refer you to another great New England Journal perspective from one of our first year students, Lash Nolan, who wrote a great article about medical education missing the bullseye. It's a really worthwhile read. And I think, I don't know what's to come. I can't even figure out what's going to happen next week. But I think that if we are prepared to learn and grow and evolve, despite the fact that change is really hard and learning new technologies is tough for faculty, let alone for students, we're going to be okay if we keep evolving.
Well, that is great advice, and I really appreciate you coming on today, Dr. Roberts. So thanks again for talking with me. Thank you for all the years of hard work and time that you've invested in medical education over the years. I want to give a special thanks to Dr. Latouf for making the introduction between us, to Dr. Kelly, who provided us today with the streaming platform, and to Daniel Kaganov, who made our intro video. To all of our viewers, please share this with your peers and institutions. Also, check out our Facebook page on medical education topics affected by COVID at facebook.com/COVIDMedEd. There, we'd love for you to share your feedback and continue discussions that we had here today. So thanks again, Dr. Roberts. Really appreciate you coming on. And I hope you're staying safe and healthy.
Thank you, Noah, and thank you everyone for watching. I look forward to seeing your comments and questions, and I hope everyone stays well. Look forward to meeting everybody in person someday.
Thank you again.
Bye-bye.